Hi everyone, and welcome to the video presentation for Module 3, which covers minor scales. So in this video we're going to work on identifying and describing three types of minor scales, construct three types of minor scales starting on any note, and understand the relationship between major scales and minor scales. Okay, so there are three types of minor scales. There's natural minor, harmonic minor, and melodic minor. And we're going to talk about the unique construction for each of those. And so by construction, I just mean they each have a slightly different pattern of whole steps and half steps. Okay, so the most important thing to remember about minor scales is that they are actually derived from major scales. So whether a scale is minor or major depends on which note the scale begins on. So as an example, the white notes on the piano create a C major scale, as you remember. So I'll play that. So these are just the white notes on the piano starting on C, which makes a major scale. But if we begin this scale on A instead of C, we now have a minor scale. So here are the exact same notes, just starting on A instead of C. Okay, so now it's a minor scale simply because we changed which note we're starting on. And the note you start on is to create a minor scale is always 3 steps below the note that makes the major scale. We call that a relative relationship, and it's always 3 steps down, which we'll learn later is called a minor third. Okay, so C, 3 steps down from that, 3 piano keys down from C is A, and that's where the minor scale begins in this key. So major scale starting on C, then we go down 3 steps from that, and now we have a minor scale. And they use the exact same notes. Okay, so that's what we call a natural minor scale, because it has all the same notes as its major scale relative. Okay, here it is, and you can see that our scale degree numbers now start on the A instead of the C. And the pattern we want to remember is the half step and whole step pattern of the first 5 notes. And we call this the minor pentachord. This is the same between all of our different forms of minor. It won't change. So this is the one we want to memorize. And so it goes whole step between the first and second degrees, then a half step between the second and third, which defines this as minor, then a whole step between the third and fourth, then a whole step between the fourth and fifth. Okay, and all together, that's the minor pentachord. So the minor 5 notes. And scale degrees 6 and 7 can be changed, and when they are, we get the other 2 forms of minor. So if they are like they are written here, it's a natural minor scale because it has all the same notes as major. Okay, but when we change either 6 or 7, we get the other forms of minor. So here is that minor pentachord again. And we're going to start changing this by creating what's called a harmonic minor scale. So a harmonic minor scale is the same as natural minor, but this time the 7th degree of the scale is raised by a half step. So the 7th degree of the scale in this case is G. We're going to raise that G to become a G sharp. Okay, so we've raised the 7th degree up a half step to become a G sharp. And we do this because we want this minor scale to behave more like a major scale. Okay, so in a major scale, we have a half step between 7 and 1. It's called the leading tone. And we also want our minor scales to have that, but they don't naturally have that. So we kind of make it have that by raising that 7th degree so that we have a half step between 7 and 1. But it creates a problem because we end up with this kind of strange interval between F natural and G sharp. We'll learn later that that is called an augmented second. but you can hear kind of how unusual it sounds for the world of classical music. All right, it sounds like it's a little bit too big, right? Like, it doesn't quite fit into what we want classical music to sound like. It sounds fine in other styles of music, but in the style of music that we're looking at, it's not quite right. Okay, so it's a problem. We need to find a way to correct that. And so we have melodic minor to correct this. So we correct that weird interval by raising the 7th degree, but also raising the 6th degree, so that F natural now becomes an F sharp. And so that weird interval now becomes just a normal whole step, so it sounds a little bit smoother than it did before. You can kind of hear how the top part of the scale just kind of naturally flows to the top, as opposed to having that big gap in the middle. Okay, so that's called a melodic minor scale when you raise 6 and 7. All right, now because this is minor though, we have another problem, and that happens when we want to go back down on the scale. So here's the scale in reverse, and you can hear that just from those first 4 notes, it kind of sounds like a major scale, because it makes sense. We've corrected it to sound like a major scale, but we still want it to have its identity. And so things have an identity in music kind of based on the first things you hear, right? So when you hear a major scale, the first thing your brain notices is that it's 3 whole steps in a row, right? That tells you that you have a major scale on your hands, right? Minor scales are the same way. Going up, the first 3 notes are whole step, half step. And you can tell that it's minor just from those first 3 notes, right? Going down, the first 3 notes have a half step, whole step, and that's what a major scale sounds like. So going down, this kind of tricks you into thinking that it's major and not minor. So we need a way to make this sound like minor on the way down. And we do that simply by getting rid of scale degrees 7 and 6. So we make it into a natural minor scale going down. Because those 3 whole steps in a row going down make it sound like a minor scale. So because of that, melodic minor has a different form on the way up than it does on the way down. So on the way up, we raise 6 and 7, and on the way down, we lower 6 and 7 to what it would normally be for a natural minor scale. So on the way up, raise 6, raise 7. On the way down, natural 7, natural 6. So whenever you're writing a melodic minor scale, you have to give us the form of it going up, the ascending form, and also the form of it going down, the descending form. Okay, so to summarize, natural minor has the same notes as major, but it starts on a different note. So C major and A minor use the same notes, but A minor starts on A, C major starts on C. Harmonic minor is the same as natural minor, but we've raised the 7th degree to make it sound more like a major scale. And melodic minor, we raise both the 6 and 7 to correct that little error in our harmonic minor scale, and then we change it into a natural minor on the way down. Okay, so let's look at some examples. We'll start with an easy one, which is D natural minor. Then we'll do a little bit tougher one, F melodic minor. Then we'll do kind of a really tough one, B flat harmonic minor. Okay, so let's start with D natural minor, and I'll try to reference the piano as much as I can so you can see the whole steps and half steps. And let's start this on a bass clef. Okay, maybe the worst bass clef I've ever drawn. So that bass clef tells you that this line here is F3, which is right here on the piano. and we want to start our scales on the letter that they want to start on. And so that's going to start on the note D, which is this one here. So if that's at that line's F, this space here is E, so our D is going to be here. So the D is our first note of the scale. Okay, now there's some different ways you can approach this. If you know your major scales, you could simply write out all the notes and add the accidentals that would go with a major scale. You can also think of it with intervals, which might be a little bit, quicker. So the first interval in the minor pentachord is a whole step. So we should have a whole step up to E. And on the piano, you can see that D to E is a whole step, so we're good. The next interval should be a half step. And you can see that E to F is a half step. The next interval should be a whole step. And you can see that F to G is a whole step. Then our next interval should be a whole step as well, which it is. And so that's our first 5 notes, which is the minor pentachord, so we're good. Okay, now we know that the next interval for natural minor should be a half step. And so we need a note that is a half step up from A. So you might think, well, a half step up from A is going to be an A sharp. So, because that's that note right there, right? And that is A sharp. But remember, we can only have one of each letter of the scale. So we already have an A. We can't have an A sharp because we already have a letter A. So we need to find a different name for it. And that's going to be B. So another way to write A sharp is as a B flat. And that also looks like a scale on the staff too, because it's up a step. So the next note up from there should be a B flat, because that's a half step, and it looks like a step, and it's the new letter. Okay, from there, the rest are all whole steps, so the next note's going to be a C. And then the last one is also a whole step to D. Okay, so there's our D natural minor scale. Let's look at F melodic minor. Now I'll approach this one a little bit different, just to give you an example of different ways you can think about this, and you can choose the one that works best for you. So for this one, I'm actually going to think of this as a relative of its relative key, right? So I want to look at the note F on the piano. I know that that's where my minor scale needs to start, but I need to find a note that is a minor third, so a whole step and a half step above that, and that will be where my major scale starts. So I know that that's going to be A flat. So I can start this by writing the note A flat. And I can write this using a major scale, right? So if I just write the notes of the major scale, my next note would be B flat. Note after that would be C. And then I could do D flat and E flat. And I know that this needs to end on F, so I could do F there. So that's the top part of my scale. Now I want to go back and start this on its actual start, which is a third below that A flat. So you could start here. All right, so I've written an F natural minor scale, but what I really need is an F melodic minor scale. So from here, you can just correct it. So I know that my 6th and 7th scale degrees of melodic minor need to be raised. So that would be this note here and this note here. So they both need to come up by a half step. So those flats need to become naturals, right? And I'll draw that on the piano so you can see what I'm talking about. So that these were D flat and E flat. And let's mark those with a different color. Okay, so D flat on the piano is going to be this note here. And E flat is on the piano is that note here. Now we have to raise those by a half step. So that D flat needs to move up a half step, and to make it do that, we need to add an accidental, or in this case, take an accidental away, so that D flat has to change into a D natural. Okay, and now that E flat also needs to go up a half step, so that E flat needs to move up to this white note, and so that white note is E natural, so that needs to be an E natural as well. Lost my D flat there. Okay, so this is now a melodic minor scale because it has a raised 6 and a raised 7. All right, it's also melodic minor, so we need to write it going down, and all you need to do is remember what you wrote for that natural minor scale, which was E flat, D flat, C, B flat, A flat, G, and F. Okay, so kind of a different way of thinking about how to build these, all right? But whenever it's melodic minor, you need the ascending form with the raised 6 and 7, and you need the descending form, which is the same as natural minor. Okay, let's do one last one, and we'll do B flat harmonic minor, and let's just stick with treble clef. And let's do this kind of the way we did the first one. We'll start on B flat. We want to write out our minor pentachord. Okay, so the first interval will be a whole step. Our next interval will be a half step. And so if you look on the piano, C to D, if we don't add any accidentals, is a whole step. So we need to make this into a half step by lowering that white note to the black note. So we need to call this a D flat instead of a D natural. Okay, whoops, that should say half step. And then the next note will be a whole step up. And D flat to E natural is not a whole step, so we need to lower that E again so that it becomes that black note. So this is actually an E flat. And then we need another whole step to finish out our pentachord. And so E flat to F natural is a whole step, so we can just write that without any accidentals. All right. Then we should have a raised 7th, but a normal 6. And so our next interval should be a half step to our 6th degree. And so from F to G on the piano is not a half step, it is a whole step. So we need to correct that so that it becomes that black note. So that needs to be a G flat. Then our next note is that weird interval, right, which is the raised 7th degree. And if you're not sure what that is, you can actually just kind of skip it. So let's write a note there, and let's write our last note, which will be the B flat. And all we need to make sure of is that there's a half step between our 7th degree and our last degree. And so we can just check that. If we look at A to B flat, that is in fact a half step. So we don't need to change that. That's fine how it is. Okay, so you can kind of skip around in the scale to compare things to other parts of the scale. Okay, so that's some basics with writing scales. If you have any questions, feel free to post them to the discussion forum. You can hold them until our next Zoom session, but hopefully this gave you a good start on building minor scales. All right, well, thanks for watching and have a good day.